The flashing red and blue lights lit up the quiet neighborhood as 3 police cars skidded to a stop in front of a massive iron gate. A tall, well-dressed black man stood calmly on the other side, phone in one hand, keys in the other. "Step away from the gate," one of the officers barked. Moments later, the world would watch in disbelief as that same man did something no one expected. He fired them all. The sun was setting behind the hills as Jordan Miles drove up the winding road to his home, a glass and stone mansion nestled quietly in an upscale gated community. He had just left a charity gala downtown, dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, polished shoes, and a wristwatch worth more than most people's cars. The Tesla glided smoothly along the quiet streets, its headlights piercing the twilight. As he pulled up to the tall iron gate in front of his driveway, he reached for the remote clipped to his sun visor. The gate began its slow, mechanical slide open, but before he could drive forward, a sudden burst of flashing red and blue lights surrounded him. 3 police cruisers appeared from nowhere, tires screeching as they boxed in his car. Doors swung open, and officers rushed out, hands hovering near their weapons. A sharp voice cut through the air. "Step out of the vehicle. Keep your hands where we can see them." Jordan sat frozen for a second, caught off guard. He blinked, confused. He looked around, then down at his suit, then at his own home just feet away. He cracked the window and tried to speak calmly. "What's going on, officer? This is my house. I live here. Step out of the car." Now one officer repeated more aggressively. The other 2 had already flanked his car, flashlights beaming through his windows like he was a fugitive. Jordan sighed and placed his hands on the steering wheel. "I'm just trying to go home," he said, trying to stay calm. But deep inside he felt a familiar icosic heavy feeling. Black men know all too well that no matter what you wear, drive or earn, the wrong people will only see your skin. That as he slowly stepped out of the car, one officer demanded ID, another questioned what he was doing in the area so late. Jordan resisted the urge to laugh. "You mean, in my neighborhood?" he replied, holding out his license. "That's my name, that's my address, and that," he added, pointing behind him, "is my house." The officers didn't look convinced. One of them snatched his ID without even checking it properly. Another asked him if the car was really his. Jordan showed the remote to the gate, and even his phone's smart home app confirming his security. The system was connected to the property. It didn't matter. "None of this proves it's yours," one of the officers snapped. Minutes passed, and Jordan was forced to stand there, like a stranger on his own land. A few neighbors peeked through their curtains, some recording quietly from their porches, but no one came outside. No one intervened. Jordan's hands were still visible, his voice measured, but his patience was thinning. "You can call the homeowners association," he said. "They know who I am, or just look at your system. My name is registered with your dispatch." But they did in single quotes T. instead. One of the cops muttered something under his breath about people not knowing their place, and that was the final spark. Jordan didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. Instead, he took out his phone and made a single call. "Hi," he said into the receiver. "Yeah, it's me. Get the home security footage queued up and call the board. We're going to need an emergency meeting." The officers glanced at him now, a flicker of doubt in their eyes, but they still didn't realize who they were talking to. As Jordan stood there, humiliated on his own driveway, they had no idea they were minutes away from losing their jobs. By the time the higher-ranking officer arrived, the mood had already shifted. The air was still tense, but a hint of unease had begun to settle over the 3 officers who had confronted Jordan. They had grown quieter, glancing at each other with uncertainty as Jordan stood calmly beside his car, arms crossed and phone still in hand. He wasn't shouting or making threats. He didn't have to. The confident silence he carried said everything. The gate to his property was still open. The mansion just beyond, its lights glowing softly in the dusk. The house, the car, the address on his ID all matched, but none of it had been enough for them. The sergeant stepped out of his cruiser, looking over the scene with narrowed eyes. He was older, gray around the temples, and clearly experienced. As soon as his eyes landed on Jordan, recognition spread across his face. "Mr. Miles," he said, his voice suddenly careful. Jordan turned and gave him a slow nod. "Yes," he replied. "Finally, someone who knows who I am." The 3 officers stiffened. The sergeant walked quickly over to them, lowering his voice but not enough to hide the tension. "Do you know who this man is?" he asked, barely hiding his frustration. The younger officers exchanged glances but said nothing. The sergeant turned back to Jordan, trying to salvage the situation. "Sir, I sincerely apologize for the confusion. We received a call about a suspicious person near this property. Clearly, there's been a mistake." Jordan stared at him, unimpressed. "A suspicious person standing at his own gate, using his own remote, wearing a suit," he said flatly. "That's what we're calling reasonable suspicion now." The sergeant tried to explain further, but Jordan cut him off. "You can stop. I already made a call. Security footage is being pulled as we speak, and you'll be seeing me again very soon at a more formal setting." He stepped back toward his Tesla, unlocked the door, and looked directly at the officers who had confronted him. I suggest you start brushing up on department policy and civil rights. You're going to need it." They didn't understand yet. They only saw a wealthy man, maybe a businessman, someone with influence but not someone who could actually affect their careers. That changed overnight. What the officers didn't know was that Jordan Miles wasn't just rich, he was powerful. In a way that mattered. He was the newly appointed chairman of the Police Oversight Board for the entire city, a position he had accepted to help reform a system that had long targeted people who looked like him. It wasn't a role for headlines or photo ops. Jordan had taken it seriously, pouring both time and millions of dollars into programs that aimed to train, monitor, and hold law enforcement accountable. He had helped create policies around community policing, body cam transparency, and anti-bias training. And now, the very system he was trying to fix had turned on him. Back at home, Jordan reviewed the security footage with his private team. Every angle was clear the moment he pulled up. The police arriving aggressively, their confrontational behavior, their dismissal of his ID and proof of ownership, their tone. The audio picked up their words exactly. The moment one muttered, "These people never learn," was loud and clear. That line would later go viral. Jordan didn't just want justice for himself. He wanted to use this moment to show the city, the department, and the public what racial profiling looks like even in wealthy neighborhoods. Even when the person profiled is a powerful executive. The next morning he requested an emergency meeting with the Oversight Board. He didn't need to rant or raise his voice. The evidence would speak for itself, and once it did, the fallout would be swift and final. The next morning, Jordan walked into the Police Oversight Board's headquarters wearing the same calm, composed expression that had never left his face the night before. The boardroom was already full. City officials, department heads, legal advisors, and community leaders all seated in a long oval table under a high glass ceiling. Cameras were set up in the corners of the room, streaming the meeting live to ensure transparency. Everyone in the room knew why they were there. The footage from Jordan's security system had already been circulated among the members. They had seen it frame by frame, minute by minute, the officers harassing a black man at his own gate, not because of evidence, but because of assumptions. Jordan placed a thick folder on the table and stood at the head of the room. He didn't rush, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't have to. His presence alone was commanding. "Before I begin," he said, locking eyes with each board member, "let me remind you all that what happened to me is not rare. It's just rarely caught on such clear footage when the person has enough power to fight back." He opened the folder and began distributing printed reports. They included incident logs, body cam footage, transcripts, radio dispatch logs, and a detailed account of the encounter. 3 officers arrived on the scene after a neighbor made a call about a suspicious black man near a gated home. Within seconds, they escalated. Despite being shown ID, proof of residence, keys, and even access to the smart gate, they treated me like a suspect. He paused. Why? Because they didn't see a homeowner. They saw a threat. The board listened in silence. One member, a retired judge, leaned forward. "Mr. Miles, what action are you requesting from this board?" Jordan looked him in the eye. "Immediate termination of all 3 officers for racial profiling, misconduct, and failure to follow de-escalation protocols. I am also requesting a formal apology from the department and mandatory retraining for every patrol officer in this district on bias and identification protocol. If it can happen to me, it can happen to any black man in this city. Next time it might not end with humiliation, it could end with a bullet." Whispers rippled through the room. Some looked down, others nodded. The weight of his words hit everyone. This wasn't just about power. This was about history repeating itself, again and again, in neighborhoods across the country. But this time, the man targeted wasn't a name on a protest sign. He was in the room, and he had the authority to demand justice. Jordan clicked a remote, and the room's main screen lit up with footage from the previous night in edited RAW. The officers yelling, Jordan calmly explaining. The dismissive responses. The slur one of them mumbled. The clear overreach. The undeniable bias. By the time the footage ended, no one had any questions left. A vote was called. One by one. Hands went up. Unanimous. The board agreed. The officers were to be dismissed immediately. A few hours later, an internal memo was released by the department. The names of the officers were made public, along with the reason for their termination. The police chief issued a brief, somber statement acknowledging the misconduct and promising full cooperation with the new training protocols Jordan had proposed. As Jordan left the building, reporters were waiting. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved toward him. "Mr. Miles, do you feel vindicated?" Someone shouted. He paused, looked directly into the cameras and said, "This isn't about revenge. It's about setting a standard. Accountability, isn't optional, is required." And with that, he walked past them all, not as a victim, but as a man who had turned injustice into change one decision at a time. The story exploded across the country within hours. News channels replayed the security footage and board meeting clips on a loop. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #fired at the gate and #justice at home. People everywhere, from students to celebrities, shared the video of Jordan standing, calmly at his own gate while being treated like a criminal. Memes, opinion pieces, and interviews flooded every platform. Some praised him for keeping his cool and using his power for good. Others predictably accused him of overreacting, of playing the race card, or setting officers up. But none of that shook Jordan. He didn't care about going viral. He cared about what came next. Jordan knew that accountability alone wasn't enough. Firing a few officers wouldn't erase the fear and humiliation black men felt every day during simple encounters with police. It wouldn't erase the trauma or distrust. So he went back to real work. Within 2 weeks he launched a sweeping new initiative through his foundation called CLEAR, Community Law Enforcement Accountability and Reform. It aimed to install smart body cam systems with AI auditing, fund community-led police training workshops, and provide legal education to high school students in underprivileged neighborhoods so the next generation would know their rights early. He also mandated that every officer in his city attend an in-person de-escalation and racial bias seminar, not an online course, not a checkbox formality, but real training with real people, real stories, and real consequences for failure. It wasn't optional, and since Jordan was now working directly with city leadership, they listened. Because when someone has both wealth and purpose and isn't afraid to use it, they become hard to ignore. Behind the scenes, Jordan received thousands of messages from people who had been in similar situations but didn't have the power or platform to speak up. Black doctors pulled over in scrubs, fathers handcuffed in front of their children outside their own homes, teenagers questioned in stores they'd shopped at for years. The stories poured in. Jordan read every one of them. They fueled him. But amid the movement, there was something else growing, something quieter. Respect from unlikely places. A week after the officers were fired, one of them, the youngest, sent a handwritten letter to Jordan. In it, he apologized. He admitted to never being trained properly on how to handle peaceful encounters. He confessed that growing up in a biased environment had shaped his perspective and that the incident opened his eyes. Jordan didn't respond right away, but he saved the letter because it reminded him that change wasn't always about punishment, it was about awakening. Jordan's own neighborhood changed, too. The same neighbors who watched silently that night began to speak out. Some joined his programs. Others organized town hall meetings to address profiling in suburban communities, something they had once believed only happened somewhere else. And little by little, walls started to come down. Months passed, the viral headlines faded, but the reforms didn't. Jordan's work became a national model. Other cities began to adopt his CLEAR initiative. Universities invited him to speak, not just as a CEO, but as a reformer. And through it all, he stayed grounded, not in his mansion, not in his money, but in his mission. One evening, Jordan stood once again at the gate where it all happened. The lights were softer now. The memory, no longer bitter but powerful. He looked up at the camera above the gate and gave a small nod. The same place where he had once been questioned now stood as a symbol not of what was, but of what could be, and in that quiet moment he smiled, not because justice had been served, but because the fight had begun, and this time he wasn't fighting alone. That if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to The Black Struggle for more powerful stories that need to be heard.